the year 1954, President Dwight D. Eisenhower declares that anti-communist United States must step in and aid South Vietnam. The goal was to prevent communism from spreading out of North Vietnam. There was a fear among Americans that communism would take over countries. Americans were confident that the U.S. was a powerful enough country that could protect South Vietnam from the communist North Vietnam.
Buckner Winston, a then recently college graduate from the University of Oregon, was involved in the Vietnam War in many ways, from joining the National Guard to avoid drafts to being a spy for the city of Portland in the state of Oregon. He had many jobs. Buck experienced both violent and peaceful protests in the midst of the war. Being a pacifist and liberal, Buck wanted the war to end and keep everything peaceful.
Were you directly involved in the Vietnam War at all?
I think the whole country was. Really. We all were to a certain extent. I mean, directly involved in that being in college, as you hear about the draft, guys were drafted. You didn't have a choice. You went into the service unless you were in college or unless you were in another branch of the service. And I, right after college, joined the National Guard because, not like nowadays where the National Guard is being sent to Afghanistan and Iraq and places like that. The National Guard was just that. They stayed home. So I thought, okay, I'm going to join the National Guard for which I did for 6 years. So that's sort of being involved. And then I was involved in anti-war protests. And I worked actually as sort of a spy for the city of Portland and the state of Oregon. By infiltrating into violent anti-war protesters and trying to calm them down. I'll tell you about that later. That was a pretty scary time. So I guess, is that direct involvement? I mean, because I am a pacifist, and I did things in a peaceful way, and I became part of this People for Portland, they called it, and it was a pretty interesting and scary time.
Not only were people involved through drafts, but protesting as well. There was a group of people known as Yippies who preached love, not war. They were more radicalized than hippies and wanted to be politically involved through peaceful protests. Some ideas Yippies thought would bring attention to their cause were absurd. One suggestion they had was placing LSD in a city's water supply. The Yippies made up what was known as the Youth Progression Party or Youth International Party. The group staged guerrilla street theater, which were dramatizations of political and social issues, to attract media attention to their causes.
Let's get together and feel all right. Whoa, 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 whoa.
So, for the protests, I don't know, you can explain that
protest,
whole scenario of
what were they like?
Yeah. Or common and stuff.
Some were very peaceful, some were just glorified rock concerts. Make love, not war. The hippie thing was coming in, and yet there were militant hippies, and they were called yippies, believe it or not, and the Youth Progression Party, and so they were really against the war. But for the most part, I would say that the protests were peaceful, with the threat of them, and there were guys who burned their draft cards and stuff like that, but there was always the threat of violence, and that's when I was doing this undercover infiltration type of stuff.
In summer 1970, the FBI predicted violence was going to occur in Portland. Anti-war activists planned to converge on Portland during an American Legion convention. Oregon Governor Tom McCall decided to create a festival known as Vortex One to prevent any violence. Vortex One was a rock festival made to lure young people away from the anti-war protests that would turn into violence. This rock festival was a great success and is the only state-sponsored rock festival in U.S. history.
American Legion, which is essentially retired veterans, retired soldiers, was holding a huge convention in Portland in 1970. And the word got out. The FBI informed the mayor of Portland and the governor of Oregon that there was going to be violent anti-war protesters 50,000 of them coming into Portland to protest these veterans, only because they were soldiers, and it could turn violent. And so the first thing our governor, Tom McCall, did was he was approached by a bunch of sort of hippie pacifists, and they said, if you want to calm things down and get these anti-war protesters out of Portland, have a rock concert. And he said, no, come on, I don't want to do that. But they convinced him. And I don't know if you know where McIver Park is. It's out on the Clackamas River, way out of town. And he got together a bunch of musicians, famous national musicians, and he held a thing called Vortex One, and it was like Woodstock. It was called the Second Woodstock. And these anti-war protesters were all downtown and everything. They're getting ready to fight and do battle and everything. They're, ooh, rock concert out of town. They all went out there. It was the greatest thing. They called it the governor's pot party for obvious reasons, and he just let them do anything. There were no cops there, but it turned out to be a very peaceful thing.
Buck was involved in protests as a spy for the city of Portland, infiltrating information to the state and trying to keep protests peaceful.
So I blame a lot on the media, because after training, and the cop said, you're going to be infiltrated into these anti-war protesters. We are not going to help you in any way. In other words, if we tear gas them, you're going to be tear gassed, because if we do help you, then your cover will be blown and there will be threats against your life. So you're just going to be one of them. And so I did. It took a couple of days, and I sort of moseyed around with them and everything, and with the overall job of just saying, no, let's just keep things calm. I mean, we can wave our flags and wave our banners, but let's just keep things calm and not get violent. There's no reason to get violent. These are old veterans and stuff. I kept trying that. And I was at the corner of Burnside and Broadway, and one of the leaders said, I think he had a suspicion that I was not actually with them. I was just there to observe and try to keep things calm. And so he handed me a North Vietnam flag. It was a big flag. It wasn't just a little flag. It was a North, and that's like if you were out on the street and somebody handed you an ISIS flag or something like that and told you to wave it around under the threat of something bad's going to happen to you if you don't, you wave it. So here I am on the street corner hoping that nobody I know sees me with the enemy's flag, waving it. And then across the street somebody yelled, "Knife! Knife!" And all of the TV stations converged on that. There was nobody with a knife. I think somebody was, and then when the TV stations, all the cameramen and the reporters and all that huddled around this corner, and then all of the anti-war protesters started forgetting what I was trying to do, and so they all started swarming over there. And then at that point, here I am with this flag, and at that point, out came the riot police with the tear gas and stuff like that, and they started marching towards me. And I think that's the most scared I've ever been in my life, because they didn't know. They didn't know I was one of them. I'm with you guys, But just the sight of them calmed things down, and then I there were about, 50 of us on that corner. And so between me, and there were other volunteers for this People for Portland, we got things calmed down on that corner. The parade went on, and we essentially did our job.
Many people thought the media lost the war for the United States, but they really just had a bias towards one side, which was anti-war. They knew it was an unwinnable war.
But it's too simplistic. The media didn't lose the war for us. And we did lose the war. The media didn't lose it for us. There's a lot more complicated stuff. But they brought forth things that made people think, instead of just accepting, oh, we're good, we're winning. We weren't winning. We didn't win for a long time. So, yeah, they had a lot to do with how the war was carried on.
With 58,000 Americans dead, 153,000 U.S. citizens wounded, and over $150 billion spent on the war, the U.S. was unsuccessful in containing communism in North Vietnam.